If you've been suffering from recurrent calcium or uric acid kidney stones, low urinary citrate may be to blame. But what is citrate and how much of it do you need? If you'd like answers to these questions and more, check out this video. Hi, I'm Joey Weichman, and welcome to Stone Relief. Today's topic of conversation is citrate, and chances are if you've been forming those recurrent calcium or uric acid kidney stones, at some point in time, at least I hope, you've had a 24-hour urine test and your doctor has probably chatted with you about citrate. And my guess is, again, if you've got recurrent stones, your citrate is probably low. And for most people that I talk to, they really don't have a good understanding of what citrate actually is and what role it plays. So today's conversation is going to be about that. We're going to talk about what it is, what impact it plays on your stone risk, and some of the other factors that you need to consider when you're experiencing recurrent kidney stones, because there's a couple different things at play, and we're going to find out citrate's role as we dive into this today. So citrate on the surface, this is just a compound that's from citric acid. And when you think citric acid, most people's minds go to citrus fruits, and you would be right, because this is going to be the primary source of citric acid in our bodies. It is an exogenous, outside of the body source of this particular item. So there is a secondary source though, and this is something that is coming endogenously. That it means we are creating it ourselves, and this is the Krebs cycle. It's also known as the citric acid cycle. So we have the ability to create this ourselves, provided we've got the right components, mostly through our diet. It's where it comes from. But the biggest impact of it is going to be from the foods that we eat. It's in everything. It's in varying degrees you're going to find this, but really, again, those citrus fruits are the highest concentration. Now, when it comes to kidney stones and why it's being measured on these 24-hour urine analysis or urine tests is because it plays a protective role when it comes to calcium oxalate stones and also uric acid kidney stones. So this is why we're talking about this today. It's why it's also measured in that 24-hour urine test. Now, when you're taking a look at these results, hopefully your doctor's having a conversation with you, but more often than not, as just been my experience in chatting with other people, you're just kind of given the thing and maybe a nurse will call you and that's about as far as it goes, and you're left to kind of interpret what this test means. So here's what you're looking for. Your goal is to have a citrate level of greater than 320 milligrams per liter. Now, some tests measure this differently. This could be a per liter measurement or it could be a total day measurement as well. And if you've been following me for any length of time, you know that your goal is to pass about 2 to 2.5 liters of urine every single day based on water that you're drinking, which is about 3 liters roughly. Now, on a daily basis, this is now talking about 650 to 700 milligrams of total citrate that we're looking for in your urine. Now, on the low end, this is really where we're starting to have some problems, and it might appear on your test. This is less than 320 milligrams per liter or less than that 640 milligrams per day. And interchangeably, these terms, you might hear hypocitraturia also in the same sentence as far as low citrate is concerned. So these terms are interchangeable. This is a little bit more of a technical term, but nevertheless, they mean the exact same thing. All right, so now that we know that citrate is a good guy and we want some presence of this in our urine, let's talk about specifically what impact this has on kidney stones. And in order to do that, we really need to break the stones up by their type. And the first one we're going to talk about is calcium stones. Now, my focus is going to be on calcium oxalate stones here. However, there is a subtle impact to calcium phosphate, which we'll discuss, but as you'll find out, it's short-lived. So when it comes to calcium oxalate stones, let's just lay the foundation here. These stone types form when you have excess calcium and excess oxalate found in your urine. This is called supersaturation. The best way to think about this is like a glass of Kool-Aid or lemonade that you're making from a powder, and inevitably we always put too much in and we get those little granules down at the bottom of the glass. This is supersaturation. Supersaturation means that there is something that is in excess that is not able to be dissolved in a liquid solution. And this is why these stones form, because they are positively and negatively charged, and when they're free to mingle, like at the bottom of the glass, all those little granules, they get together and they form crystals, which eventually turn into stones. So citrate comes in here by subtracting one of those elements from the recipe, if you will. So citrate binds with calcium in the urine to be able to make it less available to bind with oxalate. Now, this is by no means perfect, but it is eliminating portions of that recipe that will, again, minimize your risk for kidney stones. It doesn't prevent it completely, especially if there's a lot of oxalate, but it will help significantly for most individuals. Now, citrate also has the ability to increase something called Tam horsefall protein. And this protein has been identified in the research to block or slow down this crystal growth process that we've talked about in previous videos on Randall's plaque in particular about calcium oxalate stone formation. But blocking and slowing down this crystal growth is a really, really important thing. And this is a secondary benefit, not as much as the taking of that separate ingredient calcium away, but it is an important element. Now, when those comes to those calcium phosphate stones only form in alkaline urine. And the way that citrate might benefit this is, again, it's subtracting something from the recipe. So calcium and phosphate bind together just like calcium and oxalate bind in a calcium oxalate stone. So if you take away calcium, you make less calcium available for phosphate. However, it's a double-edged sword. And we're going to talk about that more here in the uric acid stones. So uric acid kidney stones require acidic urine, or a pH of less than 6 to 6.5, to be able to form. They will not form without acidic urine. So managing urine pH is the most important aspect when it comes to this stone type. So what does citrate do? Citrate metabolizes into bicarbonate, and bicarbonate has a alkalization impact on the body. So through taking citrate, you can elevate your urine pH towards neutral, which is roughly 6.5 to 7.5 on a pH scale. And you can get this done by a test through your doctor, or you can order some home urine pH test strips from Amazon. Great way to test this, and it'll give you an indication as far as what you're doing and what impact it's having. But one caution though, and this is the calcium phosphate thing that we're talking about. So too much alkalization actually sets you up for increased risk of calcium phosphate stones, because again, calcium phosphate stones only form in alkaline urine, and when their urine is alkaline, it favors phosphate over oxalate. So you can go too far, which is why it's so important to test to understand where you're currently at when it comes to your urine pH.
Just a reminder, this information is available in written form on our website. Find the link below in the description.
Okay, so now that we know that citrate is a good thing and we want it in our urine, let's talk about some potential reasons for why you may not be reaching the levels that you need to achieve that protective status. So if you've been following me for any period of time, you know I talk a lot about diet, and this is no different than any other time. Diet is the primary driver as to why you're likely suffering from low citrate. So this could be not only from like just lack of eating the appropriate foods, but it also could be, and probably is more mainly tied to, some sort of metabolic dysfunction or disorder based on the foods that you're eating, because just the high degree of prevalence. Again, 87% of the population suffering from some sort of a metabolic disorder, and primarily those things are diet driven. However, they're never going to tell you that. They just want to prescribe a medication to you and say, oh, well, it's just because, oh, well, geez, these things just happen as you age. No, no, no. They are directly related to the things that you're putting in your mouth. All about diet. You fix those things, a lot of things change, especially citrate as well. So, again, talking about food choices. Not enough potassium can also contribute to this. And there's also things that you might be eating that are potentially, again, contributing to additional renal type of metabolic disorders like distal renal tubular acidosis, whole host of other complications that screw with citrate. Additionally, citrate can be influenced by sodium intake. And I don't mean, no pun intended here, but literally take this with a grain of salt, because again, we talked a lot about half-truths and like partial information that you're being given. This is one of those things. So salt, yes, greater than 2.3 grams a day has been shown to be quote-unquote problematic, but as we're going to talk about in the next chapter, again, half-truth, not really applicable if you are eating appropriately as a kidney stone former. Thiazide diuretics and ACE inhibitors can also potentially screw around with citrate levels in your urine. These things are typically for hypertension, so if you're on medication and you're consistently achieving low citrate levels, however, you're trying to do everything that you can potentially through dietary, or maybe there's a supplement that you might be taking, you're just not getting to where you want to be, there may be something else that's at play. Definitely something that you want to chat with your doctor about. All right, let's wrap this up. So if you're health conscious, you're probably doing a ton of research and you're probably feeling a little bit like one of those machines where the ball is just kind of like bang, bang, bouncing all over the place, ping, 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 with all the information that you're either being given by your doctor or maybe the stuff that you're reading online. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. So let's get to the core here, and we're also going to link it back to citrate. So as a foundation, one thing I just want to set up here is kidney stones are the result of two things. First and foremost, if you're forming kidney stones, in particular like a calcium oxalate kidney stone, which is the most prevalent type of kidney stone globally, you lack the genetic or metabolic machinery to handle that plant toxin, oxalate. Somewhere along our evolutionary path, our ancestors just didn't need to develop the genetic or the metabolic machinery in order to handle these plant toxins, because likely we just weren't coming across them on a consistent basis. So we didn't develop it because it wasn't necessary. Whereas the other percentage of the population, and I'd say let's just use round numbers, the other 80% of the population, 20% of the population might be forming kidney stones. The other 80% of the population is likely from regions around the world where vegetation was a little bit more prevalent, so they had to develop the genetic and metabolic machinery to be able to manage that. Otherwise, they just wouldn't have survived, because the food wouldn't have been available for those if they weren't able to process plant matter. So we are on some sort of a little bit of a different evolutionary path if we're forming kidney stones, and we need to be cognizant of that, because again, we are not processing it appropriately, and kidney stones are the result of the lack of this genetic machinery. Second, metabolic dysfunction. We talked about this previously. 87%, almost 90% of the Western world is suffering from some sort of metabolic disorder. This is at the root, and these are things like obesity, diabetes, a whole host of other things. Like if you have any hint of this stuff, like your metabolic machinery is broken. It's not about lack of machinery in this sense, like the things that you're eating that are causing these things are breaking your metabolic machinery, which disables the ability to be able to process things appropriately, and it will screw with things like urine pH, calcium phosphate stones, uric acid stones, depending upon which direction it goes. So this is the root of it. So let's talk about how this links to citrate. So when it comes to citrate, really citrate becomes irrelevant if you're eating a species-appropriate diet based on your ancestral lineage. And if you're forming kidney stones, oxalate is never ever appropriate, especially if they're calcium stones. Calcium oxalate stones, never appropriate. Get rid of it. Sugar and processed foods. This is the metabolic disorder thing. I heard something from Dr. Sean Baker. He called them recreational drugs. And I cannot think of an even more appropriate definition for these, because that is what they literally are. Sugar is a drug. It's just legal and it's everywhere. And it's been that way for a long, long time. And then the processed foods aspect of it, literally, these are scientifically engineered foods to light up portions of our brains to give us a certain impact and feeling when we eat these things. It is borderline criminal, but people spend all day in a lab trying to figure out how to little tweak things in our brain to make them do things and become addictive. So sugar and processed foods are recreational drugs. You should treat them with moderation, if at all, because they screw with your ability to be able to manage what's happening in your body, and as a result, you potentially get kidney stones. So what do you do about it? Nutrient-rich, bioavailable diet. And again, I'm talking to the people of the population that form kidney stones. If you are thriving and you don't have kidney stones, ignore this advice. This is for people with kidney stones. I would suggest that you focus on animal-based foods, get all the nutrients that you need from there, and then seasonal fruit that's geographically appropriate is something that I recommend. Now, this is going to take a little bit more feathering out. Still doing a lot of research on this, still talking to a lot of people in the diet community, and some are for fruit, some are against it. I've personally tried adding it back into my diet. I have had no negative repercussions in terms of kidney stones. I did it for an entire year, and I probably ate a little bit more than I should have, but seasonal and geographically appropriate ripe fruit is evolutionarily, I think, okay, because we would have come across this even from ancestors that are from very, very northern latitudes. We probably would have come across some blueberries or some raspberries. I mean, getting up into Canada, like way far north from where I am in Wisconsin, like you are going to find these things seasonally, and we will likely have come across them and gorged ourselves on them, again, seasonally and based on where they grow, and just like moderation over the course of time. So we'd gorge, but then we wouldn't see them for a long period of time. So again, ripe fruit, ripe fruit is lower in oxalate than an unripened fruit, which is much higher in oxalate. It's protective because the plant wants it to continue to grow and then get to a point where something like us will come along and eat it, and then the seeds will get deposited with our waste, which is a nice nutrient-rich fertilizer for a new plant to grow. So this would make sense. I don't see any issue with this, and there's also some potential positive here because, again, it could lead to more citrate. So if you're suffering from calcium oxalate kidney stones, cut out the oxalate, eat more animal-based foods, and fruit is okay.
Visit our website if you'd like to join a community of people learning to manage their kidney stones naturally. See you in the next video.